This is Card-Jitsu, and if you played Club Penguin in the late 2000s and early 2010s, you definitely remember it. But what you might not remember is the slow-building storyline told in the background over the course of 5 years. A battle between good and evil, and the journey to master the elements of fire, water, and snow. Learn about the behind-the-scenes struggle to make the games amidst leadership changes at Club Penguin.
It's like, no, you gotta have a myth behind them. You gotta have, you gotta think about marketing. Will it appeal to all the audience? All these things, and you're like, oh, okay. It just got really hard to make things.
After countless comments suggested I do an exploration of the ninja journey during my Operation Blackout video, I'm here to do just that. With a thorough history lesson, exclusive interviews from 2 of the game's developers.
That's the beginning of us realizing that we were starting to bump our heads on the limitations of Flash.
And original music developed by Chris Hendricks, Club Penguin's original composer. Today, we're going to revisit everything: the myth, the dojo, and the adventures that could have been. All of the lore, all of the gameplay, and all of the secrets, from the volcano, to the waterfall, to the mountaintop. This is the Club Penguin Ninja Experience. Before we talk about the history of ninjas in Club Penguin, it's essential that we recap all of the relevant real-world history of ninjas in feudal Japan. They looked cool. That is all of the relevant history. Part 2, History of Ninjas in Club Penguin. Now we'll jump forward to 2005, when a young developer named Lance Prieb was working on a virtual chat room called Penguin Chat 3. Lance grew up as a fan of ninjas, inspired in particular by the character Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe. And because of this, he decided to hide a secret ninja costume in the game, which could be worn by clicking the N and Penguin on the color select screen. Upon hitting the dance button, the player could turn invisible. You may be thinking that Penguin Chat 3 looks very similar to Club Penguin, and that's because it was quite literally serving as a beta test for Club Penguin, as had Lance's previous projects, Experimental Penguins and Penguin Chat. Lance had been dreaming of creating Club Penguin for quite a while, but didn't think the product would be ready until around 2010. However, when Lance's pet project was discovered by his superiors at New Horizon Productions, Lane Merrifield and Dave Crisco, they immediately saw its potential and provided Lance with the necessary funds and resources to expedite its creation, speedrunning Club Penguin to a formal launch on October 24th, 2005. In the beginning, the development team was limited and was only able to work on a few overhauls at a time. Although ninjas were planned early on, the demand for pets was far larger, and the first year of Club Penguin was mainly dedicated to introducing Puffles and the Plaza, as well as many of the most significant rooms from the island. There were some seeds planted for ninjas early on. In Club Penguin's original home screen, clicking the N of Penguin would cause a ninja to appear for a few seconds before vanishing. On their second home screen, clicking the N on the nightclub would cause a ninja mask to appear on the penguin. In-game, clicking on the unmarked mountain on the map would take you to a mysterious dojo inspired by the Matrix. By the time the island's layout was formally defined, the plans for ninjas had mostly fallen by the wayside, as monthly events kept the team busy.
Ninjas are something that we'd been planning to do since 2005. And the reason why it took us so long to finally go ahead and do it is we decided pets were probably more gender neutral. So we picked Puffles first. It's the main reason why ninjas went on the back burner. Probably the next chance we would have had to work on it, the team decided to work on spies. So they had these really cool ideas for missions, and so they did the missions instead. So it wasn't until 2008 that we finally got around. We were like, okay, it's time. We're finally going to do this.
Outside of Club Penguin, kids would make their own blogs and forums, many of whom remembered Penguin Chat 3 and would speculate that ninjas were going to arrive in Club Penguin. Before long, that became among the first of many in-game myths created entirely by the players.
Ninjas originally, the only real reference we had to them was on our original homepage, where if you clicked on the end, the little penguin would turn into a ninja. That was it. There was no ninjas in the world. But kids, regardless, kept coming up with ideas and stories around, every time we'd have like a bug in the world or there'd be a little glitch, I bet it was the ninjas. Sometimes they would find a little corner of the artwork where there was like a shadow, and it'd be like, oh, that's where the ninjas are hiding. And this wasn't just for a few days or a few weeks. This went on for months and years. And ultimately, this lore grew and grew. And we knew that if we were ever actually going to put ninjas in the world, it had to be epic.
There are countless videos from pre-2008 where players point at random things on the island as signs of ninja activity, such as supposed footprints on the pet shop roof or penguin-looking silhouettes at the lighthouse and ski lodge. With demand and interest rising, the Club Penguin team decided it was time to get to work. Part 3. The Great Storm of 2008. Club Penguin is fondly remembered for its world building. Its monthly events would constantly foreshadow upcoming events. For example, during the medieval party in May of 2012, a purple meteor could be seen through the telescope in the lighthouse. This wound up crashing the next month and became the impetus for June 2012's superhero takeover. Stuff like this was also happening back in the early days of Club Penguin, as the 2008 Halloween party brought a Category 5 hurricane to the island. Rain, thunder, and dark skies were present throughout most of October. In the dojo, every time lightning flashed, strange silhouettes could be seen through the windows. If you take one look at the YouTube videos that were being published at this time, you can see the kids were freaking out. This person claimed that this was as real as ninjas would get in Club Penguin. After the party ended, there was bad news. Lightning had struck the dojo and an avalanche had buried it. Now it was up to players to dig it out. To get as many penguins involved as possible, the dojo was now shown on the map, losing its status as a secret room. The Dig Out the Dojo event also coincided with a massive overhaul of the map, making it far more accurate than the previous version. The damage to the dojo was very noticeable. Walking outside through the catwalks would take you to an incredible, iconic scene that I fondly remembered. The dojo buried and a mysterious older penguin digging relentlessly. This penguin was gray, a color that had never been seen before in Club Penguin, and his name was merely 6 question marks. Was he a ninja? This player thought so, this player didn't. This player claimed to be Hannah Montana's cousin. In the next 2 weeks alone, while the dojo was dug out, there were almost 100 separate YouTube videos where players pointed out little Easter eggs and clues that the Club Penguin development team had hidden all over the island. In issue number 160 of the Club Penguin Times, clicking the N, I, N, J, and A in this newspaper article would tell you that snow, fire, and water are a triangle of power. Clicking on 5 light bulbs and then clicking on the Wear a Hard Hat sign would show a photo of a ninja. And, most excitedly, silhouettes of ninjas could be seen jumping around the town, on various monitors in the Penguin Secret Agency's secret headquarters, on the ski hill, in the ski lodge, in the plaza, in the lighthouse, in the gift shop, and in the dojo. Some of these animations were triggered by clicking on specific places, while others were automatically timed at either 5-minute intervals or 30-minute intervals. The Club Penguin team had taken these shadows that kids had decided were ninjas and actually made them ninjas. Between November 3rd and November 17th of 2008, snow was gradually cleared away from the exterior of the dojo. This was reflected on the map, and this was reflected in the room itself. The interior also had graphical updates each week, and according to various signs, training was about to begin. And on November 17th, we would get answers, as well as one of the biggest expansions to the Club Penguin experience in the history of the site.
It started by building up hype and building up the story and the narrative through the Club Penguin Times, which, interestingly enough, was actually read at the time more than New York Times. And over the course of about 6 weeks, we kind of built to eventually finally launching what they'd all been waiting for, the ninjas in Club Penguin.
Part 4. Card-Jitsu. On November 17th, clicking on the dojo on the map would take you to an exterior courtyard, and then you had to walk into the dojo, which now had its own in-game music. dojo's theme music had actually originated in the Club Penguin Elite Penguin Force DS game, released earlier that year, and had now migrated into the actual online game. Although the ninja cameos all over the island disappeared once Card-Jitsu launched, the penguins hopping past the dojo roof remained for the duration of Club Penguin. Training mats were set up in the dojo, and under an arch sat the mysterious figure. The Club Penguin Times had revealed that this was the sensei. After mastering the art of Card-Jitsu in the wild for years, he was now ready to teach his power to the residents of Club Penguin. As the island's oldest and wisest citizen, he was immediately respected, although he was still a mysterious old man who spoke only in haiku, a 3-line form of Japanese poetry where the top line has 5 syllables, the middle has 7, and the bottom has 5. In this interview from the newspaper, Sensei speaks in haiku, but when the reporter asks him if he only speaks in haiku, he plainly says no and talks normally for the rest of the interview. By waiting on a map or speaking to the sensei, you will be paired with another player on your server for a game of Card-Jitsu. To explain servers very quickly, an individual online server wasn't able to hold tens of thousands of players at once, so a massive server network was introduced, and you'd have to click on one before logging into the game. Think of them as alternate dimensions. The players in the Mammoth server could all see each other, but could not see any players from any other servers. Once paired with another player from your server, the game would begin, and with it, one of the most iconic pieces of music from the entirety of Club Penguin. Card-Jitsu was essentially rock, paper, scissors mixed with the card game War. Each round, 2 players would put a card down, and whoever's card won would keep the card. The other would be discarded. How does a card win a round, you ask? Well, there are 2 factors. The first factor was the elements. Each card was assigned one of 3 elements: fire, water, or snow. Water cards would always put out fire cards because water puts out fire. Fire cards would always beat snow cards because fire melts snow. And snow cards would always beat water cards because snow freezes water, apparently. And so, that was the primary factor to determine the winning card. But when both players on the mat played cards with the same element, then the card would default to a number system. Cards were numbered 2 to 12, and in the instance of an element tie, the card with the bigger number would win. If these were tied, the round would be a draw. Both cards would be discarded and no one would keep a card. Cards numbered 9 or higher were called power cards, and all of them had their own specialized animation that would occur when played successfully. Power cards had special functions when played successfully, such as removing a scored card from another player or blocking a certain color or element from being played in the next round. There were 6 different colors of Card-Jitsu cards, and these determined how one would win a game. The first way was to either have 3 of the same element in 3 different colors, or to have 1 of each element in 3 different colors. If you could achieve one of these 2, you would win the game. In the first year of Card-Jitsu, 234 individual cards were launched across 4 waves, 51 of which were power cards, which means that 1 of 51 unique animations would play upon a power card being successfully used. Upon speaking to Sensei, the player would be awarded with 10 starter cards. Every player received the same 9 standard cards, and were then given one of these 3 power cards. These were by far the most common cards you would see on Club Penguin. At this time, outside of the starter deck, the only way to get new power cards was to purchase real-life card packs from mass retail. Each physical deck of cards would include a code that could be used to unlock in-game cards.
Because now we are part of Disney, this also resulted in merchandising.
And then when it starts approaching Pokemon levels of success in terms of the trading cards in the market, it must have just been so surprising.
The topic of Card-Jitsu cards brings us to our first interviewee, Chris Glidden, who originally worked on the customer support team before joining the creation of Card-Jitsu as a developer.
I wanted kids to be excited to write into us and for us to like just turn their dreams into reality. And it was fun too, because people would write, you'd be like, hey, I named my Puffle Stinky Pants. Isn't that cool? I'd be like, yeah, that's awesome, man. You named your Puffle Stinky Pants? That's awesome. I named my Puffle Stinky Pants too because of you. Hope you have a great time on Penguin. See you later.
Chris was responsible for creating every single Card-Jitsu card that you see in the game, gathering whatever stray art asset he could find, from the last 3 years of Club Penguin to plaster on the cards.
A little bit was also me just finding the funniest spins. Was like, these would be really funny cards. I know Lance really wanted the Mighty Plunger. That didn't exist in the world. We made that originally for Card-Jitsu. And I was like, okay, if he likes Plunger as power, let's find some of the goofiest things that would be the most unpowerful items. And that was kind of the creative approach that I took when I was picking the cards. But then there were other camps that were like, what are you doing? Like, why is the Plunger the most powerful, amazing? Like, think about the getting of, you're a kid, you buy a pack of cards, you want the things you love the most to be the cool foil cards. So it's kind of like, what are you doing, Polo? Like, why are you going and picking the Plunger as the power card when you should be picking like the thing that most kids want, which is Rockhopper, you know, the ninja card, like those. So that was the tension with that, because then it would play out in the game. So over time, we sort of moved away from comedy power cards and into like, you know, what are the most popular characters and places, just to make sure that we gave those foil cards physically in the trading card game. So
the Card-Jitsu game itself was only the beginning of the experience. Every few games you won would unlock a new belt. This probably only should have taken like a day, but I definitely struggled with this for over a full year, if I remember correctly. Once you reached the black belt, it was finally time to challenge the sensei and earn your ninja mask. Sensei was a CPU. If you attempted to challenge the sensei at any point before reaching black belt, you would lose. He was programmed to always play a card that would defeat yours, meaning it was literally impossible to earn a single card against him if you weren't at a black belt yet. And while beating Sensei was still difficult as a black belt, it was possible. And if you managed to do it, he would finally grant you the rank of ninja and give you the mask.
I am a huge fan of irony, and I think that is just one of the things that Card-Jitsu did just beautifully, especially the original one, because you would have like this dun, 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 dun. You have this kind of like battle music, and it's intense, and you hit the plunger, and there's the mighty plunger, and then there's a fish, and it's totally complete Monty Python nonsense. Actually, irony is a really great creative device if you can use it.
Ninjas were then able to access a top-secret ninja hideout. There, anyone could play Card-Jitsu together, and paid members were able to buy wave bracers and the ninja outfit, which, in combination with the mask, could allow the player to turn invisible upon hitting the dance button or the wave button, just like in Penguin Chat 3.
You would get access to this special room to prove that you got there, right? So you get to the ninja hideout and it proves that only the people in this room are black belts, right? So it's kind of special. It was like kind of like a secret agent. You were a special player because you'd made it that far.
Now, this wasn't just costumes, because again, remember, we had to make it epic. So it included belts that could be earned by leveling up throughout the game. It included a brand new area with a dojo and a sensei. And in fact, the game Card-Jitsu that was ultimately launched was so popular that it was played over 100 million times in the first 10 days after launch.
For the next year, Card-Jitsu proved incredibly popular with players. And what we didn't know is that this was just the beginning.
Basically, Card-Jitsu just skyrocketed to the #1 game. Like before, it was like sort of Sled Racer was your top, and your sort of your Kart Surfer, like all the games you would expect in your data to be the top games, right? Those ended up, you know, Card-Jitsu just showed up and was like, bam, so much bigger than everything else. And you look at that and you're like, well, I guess people want more journeys, right? They're like, I want more quests, more stuff. Like people just wanted to do more ninja adventures. It just naturally introduced the idea of like, well, what's next?
Number 5, I think, the Eruption of 2009. Immediately after the Fall Fair on September 14th, 2009, a newly discovered active volcano turned the skies red all around the island, based on the real-life Kelowna wildfires that had occurred around the time. Accompanying the red skies, the ninja shadows at the ski lodge and the lighthouse were nowhere to be seen. Sensei guided the player through a mini-event known as Sensei's Fire Scavenger Hunt, where various haiku messages would send you across the island to find heat-related items. All of this heat was being transferred into the ninja hideout, where a large spinning wheel on the left side made it very clear that something was coming. After a week of red skies, penguins were finally introduced to Card-Jitsu Fire. Well, actually no. That's what should have happened.
We ended up with so many bugs in Card-Jitsu Fire that we had to go through and fix all the bugs before we could launch it. So we had planned to launch it at a certain time. I think it was September of 2009. But there were so many bugs that QA was like, nope, can't launch it. And so we just, with the fire, the orange sky of the world just stayed up there forever. And then we basically were just like, are we just going to leave it orange sky for like 3 months until you guys finish QAing and fixing the bugs of this game? Like, are we ever going to launch it? What's going to happen? So eventually we took the orange sky down, which was even super confusing. So there's this funny time in history where it's like orange sky and then no orange sky, and then it's just blue sky for a while. And then ta-da, here's Card-Jitsu Fire. Anyways, that was kind of internal problems that we had at the time that delayed that game.
Because of last-minute bugs, the launch of Card-Jitsu Fire was delayed. The scavenger hunt and the fire disappeared from the island after 2 weeks, the newspaper told ninjas to be patient, and the wheel disappeared from the ninja hideout, which would remain under construction for about a month. As the Club Penguin team struggled behind the scenes to figure out the bugs that were breaking Card-Jitsu Fire, and, for the first time ever, we know exactly what those bugs were, as I introduce my second interviewee, Russ.
I was on the games team. I started with missions. I co-created Card-Jitsu Fire, created Card-Jitsu Water. Hello, I look like this.
Hello there.
Gray-haired, and that's how it goes. Yeah, I did the gear puzzle and the soldering puzzle when you're reassembling the magnet, the one where you have to put the water back and forth, the pink fluid. That was me. It's funny, we made it and then we tested it, and none of our kid testers could get it. It was too hard. So that's why on the sand, there was that little scroll we put down there, just in case you didn't get it. You could click on it and it showed you the sequence sort of thing.
Before getting held up on the PSA missions for too long, I asked Russ what specific bugs held up Card-Jitsu Fire for so long.
In the end, it comes down to me. It's my fault. On Club Penguin, technically, you have a server and you have your client sitting on your computer, and they talk back and forth. And there's lots of messages that are going back and forth all at the same time. So when I was doing some of the initial code for this game, for Card-Jitsu Fire, I had said, you know what, one of the things we wanted to do was to have the ability that penguins could come in and watch the game without playing it. So you would basically have a viewing gallery. So early on, I put in some code that said, while you were in here, we send these messages around that you could see, basically. So you weren't in the game, but you were watching the game, and these messages were going to you. As we went along, we said, okay, we're not going to do that, but we forgot to take that piece of code out. So what would happen is you would play a fire game, and everything was perfect. Scoring was perfect. Everything happened. Penguins were jumping the right spots. You would go to play a second game. So your second game would go fine, but then all of a sudden, one of your penguins would do something weird. They might jump across the board, or you get the wrong spin, or the wrong card would show up. Something wrong would happen. And as you've probably figured out by now, because I never took this code out, every time you played a game, you were now sending your messages to yourself and the people you had played with. So your first game went to 4 players. Your second game went to the 4 players that are there, and the 3 others, or the 3 that you were playing with, and the 3 others that had played before. And as you played more games, this got worse. So now you're telling everybody in every other game what your moves were, and everybody was doing that. So the end result was your game would start fine, and the more games you played, the more random things would get. Because in another game, somebody might attack you or jump across the board, and you would now see that in your game.
We were doing more of the classic coded in Objective-C, like sit down and write your Latin to make this game work.
It was just one line of code that
It was a few lines of code.
Oh, yeah.
And then one of the very smart engineers tracked that down finally, and we all just slapped our head. And we were working on it night and day trying to figure this stupid thing out. And at the end, it's like, oh my gosh, it's the spectator code. That was my fault. Sorry, I did that.
On November 13th, 2009, Club Penguin re-prepared for the launch of Card-Jitsu Fire. Construction finished. A stone tablet would now rise from the ground upon entering the room, and clicking it would activate a secret door, the entrance to the Fire Dojo, which could be seen under construction for the next week. In the dojo courtyard was a call to action, asking goldsmiths to forge these strange golden amulets. You see, the newspaper had kept occasionally alluding to the volcano in the prior weeks. They even went as far as to claim that the volcano had caused the storm at the 2009 Halloween party. Now, things were heating up, and Sensei revealed that he had only tamed the volcano by using this special amulet, and that more were needed in order for ninjas to complete their training. It was now available to purchase in the Martial Artworks catalog, and in fact, you could not enter the Fire Dojo unless you had purchased the amulet. And finally, on November 24th, 2009, Card-Jitsu Fire finally launched. Almost 2 months after its originally intended release date.
Things always go wrong, man. When you ship a game, oh yes. Why do you think I have no hair? I used it all up tearing it out of games.
Card-Jitsu Fire. I'm not doing the numbers anymore.
It started as a myth, born out of the shadows. A mysterious figure appeared to train those willing in the ancient art of Card-Jitsu. This journey requires patience, practice, power, and hot sauce. Lots of hot sauce. For those who defeat Sensei and become ninjas, things are heating up. A new challenge has presented itself. Are you ready to master the element of fire?
I love how 90% of the Card-Jitsu Fire trailer is just a trailer for Card-Jitsu. Card-Jitsu Fire launched alongside a week-long celebration of fire. Red banners lined the path to the new room and the new game. Of course, after the first week, these red banners would disappear, replaced instead by a sign which, when clicked on, would show the trailer for Card-Jitsu Fire. This would remain here for the next year. The Fire Dojo was located in a volcano, high above the dojo. Its theme music was far more ominous and treacherous than the original dojo. The amulet was members only, which meant that only members were able to play Card-Jitsu Fire. I remember my parents had given my older sister membership, but not me. So for a long time, I could only watch her play Card-Jitsu Fire, and I never got to experience it for myself. Anyone who said money doesn't buy happiness clearly did not play Club Penguin. Upon speaking to the sensei in the Fire Dojo for the first time, the player would be given a Fire booster deck, which consisted of 9 additional regular cards, and 1 of 2 power cards. All of these could be used in both regular Card-Jitsu and Card-Jitsu Fire. To accompany the game, 2 new series of cards were released across the first year of Card-Jitsu Fire, consisting of 122 new cards, 25 of which were power cards, and brought with them 25 new animations. Once again, these could only be acquired in-game by first seeking out the real-world decks and using the included codes.
Got an unopened package of Card-Jitsu cards. I don't think it'll work anymore, but...
Card-Jitsu Fire was a lot more complex than Card-Jitsu, and could be played by up to 4 penguins. Card-Jitsu Fire was more of a board game than a card game, though every spot on the board would prompt a game of Card-Jitsu. Card-Jitsu Fire's score was a fiery remix of the original Card-Jitsu game. An extended version of the theme was also used in the trailer for Card-Jitsu Fire.
Water and snow kind of almost sound more passive. Like as a storyteller, you're like, when you think of fire, you think hot, intense. I think that was one of the reasons we kind of found our way into fire as the first element to explore.
Let's get to the gameplay. There were 2 rings, an inner ring and an outer ring. Penguins stand on various spots of the outer ring. When it's their turn, they click on a blank tile of the inner ring. The inner ring would then randomly pick a number between 1 and 6, essentially functioning as a 6-sided die. The number that the inner ring gave you was how many spaces you got to move your penguin around the outer ring.
So you know how the things spin around and then sort of flip over? That was originally an actual spinner, like you would see on a board game, because we had the board game tie. And very late in the process, it was like, oh no, we can't have that. We want it to be more mystical, more interesting, which was a good decision. I think that was actually, there was a lot of great decisions like that.
You would have then landed on one of 5 different types of tiles on the outer ring: fire, water, ice, choice, or Card-Jitsu. Landing on a fire tile would force a fire-specific Card-Jitsu battle. The number became the only thing that mattered, and you had to play the biggest number you had in your hand of that element. If you didn't have any cards of that specific element, you were out of luck. Landing on water would do the same, but water specific. Landing on snow would do the same, but snow specific. Landing on choice would let you choose which element you wanted to battle with. For example, if you didn't have any water cards in your hand, then you could have chosen fire or ice. Landing on a Card-Jitsu tile would let you play a traditional game of Card-Jitsu, only without the funny animations. In multiplayer games, you were given the option to choose your opponent. In addition, landing on the same spot as another penguin would have automatically forced a Card-Jitsu battle between them specifically, regardless of what the tile was. The color of the card was completely irrelevant to Card-Jitsu Fire. Only the number and the element mattered. You started every round with 6 energy points. Every time you lost a match of any of these kinds, you would lose a point. In the one-on-one Card-Jitsu battles, the winner would also receive their opponent's energy point. The goal was for your opponents to run out of energy before you did. If that sounds confusing, that's because it was. No one on the playground actually knew how to play Card-Jitsu Fire. We all just clicked buttons until things happened. Researching this video was the first time I ever found out that the inner ring functioned like a 6-sided die and determined how many spaces you moved. I had no clue what was happening, ever.
At the time, it was just, hey, what if we could take the game that we made, which is a card game, and make other games off of it?
And so we were like, okay, let's do some games, one on sort of each element.
It's like, okay, well, what about the idea of moving a character around, adding that on top of the cards? And so I think fire just emerged from that. It's like, well, I guess we could be on top of a volcano and like moving around the stones on top of like, lava.
Troy and I, he had some games. I was trying to remember what it was. There was an old Star Wars game that Card-Jitsu Fire is loosely based on. It was inspired by. We didn't steal it. Just inspired by.
So it actually started as a board game. Card-Jitsu Fire was originally like a paper prototype that Good T / Troy, he made this like cardboard piece, and we'd go and we would play this prototype and we would walk around. It looked a little bit like Monopoly, actually.
We made them in real life first, and you play them in real life because you can tell whether the game is fun and you can make changes really fast. If you go to code right away, you don't know what you're coding before you start coding. So first make the game in real life, make it fun, and then commit it to code. Gold coins, but when you were playing the fire game, this was your energy sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
So, and that's sort of how the game went. It's like, okay, you got this many coins, and when you lost, we took one of your energies away. We had a little spinner, I think, where we were using dice to figure out which way you would move.
There were 4 unlockables on your journey as a fire ninja: the flame sandals, the magma coat, the lava mask, and the fiery helmet. All 4 of these costume pieces in combination would allow you to control fire and turn invisible upon hitting the dance or wave buttons. After earning the helmet, you could challenge Sensei, and if you beat him, you'd earn the Fire Gem, which would permanently go on your amulet.
When you were battling Sensei in the games, we're like, how the heck do you make that happen? So I came up with this little thing here, which is, it's literally an envelope of poker chips, but there was an element on each one. And so you would take all these poker chips, they're all water now, and you would shuffle them, place them upside down, and then when Sensei was going to play a card, you would just draw one of these, and it's like, oh, okay, Sensei played the water, he played this. So this was what we used as sort of the fake AI when we were building these games, sort of thing.
In the ninja hideout, after beating Sensei at Card-Jitsu Fire, the red gem would glow on the floor. It was very clear now that new challenges based on water and snow would be coming, and we would be ready. The Rainstorm of 2010. Card-Jitsu Water launched in an almost identical manner to Card-Jitsu Fire. After the 2010 Halloween party brought like the 4th consecutive annual storm to the island, rain poured relentlessly after the party ended. Between October 28th and November 14th, rainwater flooded the island, and this led directly into Sensei's water scavenger hunt on November 16th, 2010. Sensei needed the players to once again collect 8 water-related items as soon as possible. Here's a fun fact I actually remembered by myself. The day that the water scavenger hunt began was the day that the Club Penguin Times was downsized, from a big multi-page spread to a single double-sided strip. I had actually stayed up and waited for the servers to update with this scavenger hunt. It's one of the few times I did that on Club Penguin. I remember being super surprised and upset that the newspaper was smaller now, but like, this is a fictional island that had weekly parties, events, and updates with a small team. I completely understand why it happened now. A massive series of pumps could be seen all throughout the island, leading into the ninja hideout. Once inside, members could enter the hole in the ground and see the under construction water dojo. There was no flubbed launch this time. The scavenger hunt disappeared after a week, and on November 24th, 2010, Card-Jitsu Water was here. That is, if your computer was capable of running it. Card-Jitsu Water.
For those who have mastered the ancient art of Card-Jitsu, it is time for a new wave of challenges. Beyond the myth and high above the dojo, a place of mist and mystery emerges from the clouds. From here, a new ninja journey begins. Turn the tides on your opponents with patience, practice, power. Reach the waterfall and discover a new battle. Are you ready to master the element of water?
Back in 2010, I showed this commercial to my sister. However, in the years since Fire, she had entered middle school, and she was way too cool for Club Penguin. I remember she yelled at me for showing her the trailer, because Club Penguin was stupid. She wasn't a kid, she was 12. Luckily, that meant I got membership, and I remained a member for the duration of Club Penguin. Thank you, Kayla. The water dojo was in a waterfall, once again high above the dojo. It could be accessed through the ninja hideout. It was a dimly lit, carved-out interior of a waterfall, on a treacherous dangling platform, where fast-paced percussion echoed throughout the chasm. There was a week-long celebration of water to accompany the game's launch, with blue banners hung up during the first week of the game, before eventually disappearing. Card-Jitsu Water saw 150 more cards get released across 2 waves, which worked in all past and future Card-Jitsu titles, 27 of them being power cards. As with the previous waves, these could only be unlocked by buying real-life decks and using their codes. However, Water did have a booster deck, which consisted of these 9 regular cards and only this 1 power card for all players. Gameplay-wise, Card-Jitsu Water was the simplest to understand yet, with a roaring musical accompaniment.
Water originally was more sort of peaceful, zen-like, like you go to the spot. And then there was a lot of tension about, do we make Card-Jitsu, do we lean into the comedy? Which is really Lance. Lance is like, just loves his comedy. Or do you go into like the cool factor of like, I'm a ninja and it's secretive and I'm powerful? Like, which one do you go into? And what's the recipe? What percentage is comedy versus, power?
The game was once again only concerned with elements and numbers. 2 to 4 players are on stones and have to keep from falling over the edge of the waterfall. The goal is to reach the gong at the end first, or to simply be the last one standing. All the tiles in front of the players had an element on them, and cards rapidly scrolled across the bottom of the screen. You could either choose cards that would combat the element in front of you, or increase the element on any tile directly surrounding you. If you have a fire in front of you, you can throw water on it and hopefully progress. If your opponent has fire in front of them and that tile's in range, you can throw a fire on their tile, making it harder for them to escape. The higher the number on the card, the more effective it would be, as some hazards in front of you were larger than others. Power cards also had a greater range than regular cards, so you could simultaneously clear blockage in front of you and sabotage your competitors. That's it.
Originally, all the Card-Jitsu games, Water, Fire, and Snow, were all card-based. Card-Jitsu Water, it was more like, are you familiar with the game Triple Triad? It's from some of the Final Fantasy games. There was one of the writer/game designer, Cody, that we worked with. He loved that game. I think obsessed might be a better word with it. And so we had a game that was very different. You played it on I think it was a 3x4 grid of cards. And the cards you put down would would battle the cards beside it, like the 4 compass points. And there was this other mechanic where when you beat a card, it would then challenge the next card next to it. So you had this you could get this like flood of battles happening, which went with water sort of thing. And we had all these worked out, and then Snow had its own sort of mechanic, and it was a card game as well. And then at one point after we'd finished Fire, the management team was like, nope, it can't be. Actually, I think it was Lane. Actually, is like, it can't be a card game. It has to be a real-time game. And we're like, we had all these plans, and it's like, nope, it can't be that. And so, but we're like, it was going to be a board game too. Like, it's like, nope, it's got to be a real-time game.
They would come up with a prototype and they'd be like, hey, what do you think of this? And they'd be like, no, I don't like it. So there were just a lot of like, the stakes were too high at that point, right? It was the big flagship game for Penguin, and we just needed to get it right. So we were a lot more hard on the ideas at that time. Like, we were not willing to just accept any old idea.
We didn't know what to do for, about a week or a few days. And then I took a deck of Card-Jitsu cards, and I went and I sat out in the lunchroom area, and I just started coming up with ideas. And it took me about an hour to come up with a Card-Jitsu Water game and the mechanic behind it.
The waterfall idea, and that was brought into like, you need some sort of like emotional tension, like some sort of like, as you're playing it, like, the stakes are higher because you're on the top of the waterfall and it's like, oh, you could fall off the waterfall. Need to hurry. And there's a timer. It was to increase a sense of urgency.
We had some amazing engineers that made a real-time game multiplayer on what is essentially a text engine, like for chatting sort of thing. So that was amazing.
The rounds were very short and also very laggy. Card-Jitsu Water was infamous for how absurdly slow it ran on most computers and how most losses in the game could be attributed to lag. Most Club Penguin games were just single player, and it's like, oh wow, click, wow, jumped, wow, they ran fine. Card-Jitsu and Card-Jitsu Fire were the first games that actually began to run slowly because of the online multiplayer aspects, but they were generally fine. Card-Jitsu Water, however, had hundreds of assets moving on screen at the same time, and it became far too much for the average family's computer to handle back in 2010. And the team had to retroactively introduce resolution controls in order to make the game run smoother. As such, all of my memories from Card-Jitsu Water are extremely pixelated, although I did ultimately become a water ninja.
Water really struggled with Flash because Flash would run on a single core of your processor. So it would just struggle to draw all the vector lines because there's so much animation happening on the screen. There's like these lines. And so like it was just crazy slow on some people's computers, right? Especially if you didn't have a decent GPU. It just really struggled.
It was just too much. One of the problems was we had really good computers at Club Penguin. And so what we were developing seemed like it had a good frame rate. And then once we got it out into the world, you're like, wow, everybody else's computer sucks and ours were too fast. So now it was like, how do you make this faster?
So it's just Flash. Flash was struggling. Like that's the beginning of us realizing that we were starting to like bump our heads on the limitations of Flash. Even back in 2009, we're like, especially 2010 when it came to Water, we were just bumping our heads against that wall. It was just slow, so there was performance issues. We also had like all the localization pieces because if you think about the original Card-Jitsu, we built it before we did translation. So suddenly everything became more complicated. We had to coordinate with global teams. There were a lot of people around the world. We had to get strings back and forth. We had to coordinate getting those strings into the database. And it just, we struggled a bit.
So we went back and did tons and tons and tons of optimization to get it to the speed it was at the end. That was just an oversight.
Unfortunately, Flash failed us. So we didn't have the dream game that we wanted from that.
You do your best and then you let it out in the world and it's just going to get, reality's going to beat the heck out of it and you're going to have to fix it and react and make the game you should have made first. And then you take that knowledge and the next game, you make it as good as you can and you learn and it gets better over time by far.
Winning rounds of Card-Jitsu Water would unlock the Wave Sandals, the Waterfall Coat, the Torrent Mask, and then the Helmet of Oceans. These, in combination, would allow a player to control water in a similar manner to Fire Ninjas. After earning all of these, you could challenge the sensei himself for the Water Gem, and then your amulet would only be one gem away from completion. With the element of water mastered, ninjas waited for the inevitable third part of the trilogy, Card-Jitsu Snow, and we kept waiting, and we kept waiting. And massive leadership changes behind the scenes ensured that the Card-Jitsu Snow we eventually got was not at all what we would have expected. The off years. Very shortly after the release of Card-Jitsu Water, two of Club Penguin's three co-founders left the company, Dave Crisco and its original creator, Lance Priebe. This left Lane Merrifield as the only original co-creator still working at the company. And without Lance's aforementioned love of ninjas, progress on Card-Jitsu ground to a halt. Card-Jitsu Snow wouldn't come out for another 2.5 years.
We had three kind of flagship, I guess for lack of a better word, you could call them sub-brands. Like we had Puffballs, we had Ninjas, and we had Spies. Resources are always finite. If you're running a business, you still have to decide, where do I spend my time? And even if you have a successful product, you still have this limitation, this constraint, which is, how many team members do I have? And what are they working on at any given time? So over those few years, we were putting a lot more emphasis. If you look at the time overlap, a lot more emphasis was going into Puffles and Spies. So it was kind of this like, do we do Spies right now or do we do Ninjas right now? And there's this constant like tension in the triangle. Which one do we spend time on? Puffles, no. EVF, no. Puffles, yeah.
During this 2-year window, the real-life trading card decks retired from store shelves, and several planned physical releases were canceled as well.
But it was going to be an actual board game as well. And I think the thought was we would have all the board games connect together. So you would have your Fire Arena, and when we got Water out, that would just sort of slot into the other one, and now your board game would be twice as big. And then originally at the end, you'd have a 2x2 sort of grid of all different types of Card-Jitsu sort of things.
They didn't wind up like releasing anything physically for those games?
No, we did a lot of work on that. You could take your figurines you bought and use them on the board game, and then each board game you bought would make your sort of set much more impressive and much more fun to play. There was an actual Card-Jitsu board game as well. There was one that was more like a Snakes and Ladders or Chutes and Ladders sort of game, which is one I developed, where you could. It was more like a typical board game where you were hopping ahead. You roll dice and move ahead, and then you could use the card mechanic to battle people and send them back and forth. But it was all just, it was a big fold-out board, like Monopoly sort of sized, that never got released.
The Club Penguin team still viewed November as a month focused on Card-Jitsu, as the previous 3 games had been released in November. As such, 2011 saw the island's first formal Card-Jitsu party.
Club Penguin Island is divided. Fire and water collide for the new Ninja Party. For the first time ever, Sensei will unlock exclusive ninja games for everyone to play. Are you ready to battle at ClubPenguin.com? For a limited time only, you can play some games that normally require paid membership. Parent permission required.
The island was divided in half by Fire Ninjas and Snow Ninjas, and the 2 classes could battle in the middle. If enough Fire Ninjas used their special moves, the skies would turn red. If enough Water Ninjas used their special moves, it would start raining. So the whole island was a constant turf war of kids supporting whichever side they chose in the battle between fire and water. Pretty sure water would win that battle, but whatever. During the event, anyone could play Card-Jitsu Water or Fire, not just members. However, after the party ended, those privileges were stripped away and everything you earned during that time would be grayed out. Non-members could not do anything. We were poor and sad and it made us upset. #EatTheMembers. 2012 had no updates to the Card-Jitsu experience, as that year's November was dedicated to Operation Blackout, the best party of all time! Woo! Although Russ and Troy were trying desperately to get Card-Jitsu Snow off the ground behind the scenes.
We had finished Card-Jitsu Water, and it was fairly successful. We were working on Snow, and we had a very different game. It was no longer a card, it was going to be real time. And the Snow game that we designed was you would get up to 4 ninjas on a snowball, like a big snowball, imagine that. And this snowball would start rolling down the hill, and all 4 of your characters would have to run, basically. And they needed to run. So the direction of the snowball would move in was sort of the average of where everybody's running. So if you were running left and I was running right, the average would be straight down the track. So what we had is this thing going down a track, and if you want to go around it, all of your characters had to work together to steer the snowball as it was hurtling down the track. And you would go over jumps, you pick up bonus things. Chris and Gord, they did most of the artwork for the early, like sort of mid Club Penguin, and they're just amazing. They were, in some ways, they're the heart of Club Penguin, and they were working on the art for Card-Jitsu Snow, and we had a big dojo that was sitting up on the top of a peak. You would stand in line like you do for sled racing sort of thing, and then it had these great big gates that would open and snowballs would kind of roll out. and then everybody would hop on, and then they would just zoom off down the hill. So we had a lot of artwork done, and a lot of the game fleshed out, and we had been testing it with kids. And again, sort of the manager came to us and said, no, that's not what we want. We want something different, sort of thing.
It's actually like this big sort of snowball running game, like almost like an endless runner. Was kind of one of the early Card-Jitsu Snow prototypes, and it just wasn't landing. And it was also around the same time that we were doing the work to get onto mobile, which was not a small undertaking. Like, we basically had to rebuild all of Penguin, all of the assets, all of the sprites to get onto mobile. And the platform that we were using is what we built Card-Jitsu Snow on. So there was also this, we need to make sure that Card-Jitsu Snow is going to work on mobile as well when we launch it. Whereas before that, we didn't have mobile in the equation. So Card-Jitsu Snow was kind of designed around, okay, what are we going to do for touch interfaces?
It was kind of a tough time because on the games team, we thought nothing but games. And on sort of that current management team at the time, they weren't gamers. They didn't play games. So you couldn't go to them and say, you know, we want to do a game like this game. They'd all kind of look at you like, and you're like, okay. So, and then you try another thing. So you couldn't, it was a little hard to talk to them, sort of thing, because you would have all these game ideas and they had none of this. So we didn't always connect. So
that was after Lance and Dave left, correct?
Yes. What was nice about the three of them is they were sort of like three legs of a stool, I think. So Lance was games and sort of being really creative. And this is, again, these are just my opinion, sort of thing. Dave was all business. He set up the business. And Lane was the salesman. Like, Lane can sell like ice cream to, you know, people living in the north. And ice cube makers. He's really good at doing that sort of thing. When Dave left, that was fine because you still had these sort of two legs of the stool and they can still kind of stand. When Lance left, there was really no one championing games anymore. And it was just a little difficult. It was a difficult time. So we, I think, reworked Snow, I don't know how many times. And I got to the point where I was just like, I'm never going to ship a game here anymore. It was not possible because it just was not, it was not a game friendly environment, sort of thing. No, nothing, Club Penguin was still going along really well, but it was hard to innovate. And when you do something for a long time, early Club Penguin was like the Penguins would do anything. It didn't matter. It was just freedom. It's like you had a cool game idea, we'll work it in and the Penguins will do it. As you went along, you began to get a Penguin brand. And now it was more difficult because it's like, was it Puffle Cannon?
Puffle Launch.
Puffle Launch, that's it. We had this boss that you were going to hit, and he was called Scowly.
The owl.
The owl. And he was this big owl sort of thing. And we had him animated, and he was amazing sort of thing. And we couldn't put him out. And we're like, well, why not? It's like, well, you can't just introduce a new character to the island. We're like, that happens all the time. It's like, no, you gotta have a myth behind him. You gotta think about marketing. Will it appeal to all the audience? All these things. And you're like, oh, okay. And so we couldn't do that. So it became Krusty in that sort of floating machine that he does. So between these two things, it being no one sort of speaking for games at the top, and just internally, you just start editing yourself. You just start saying, no, it can't be that. It has to be this specific thing. It just got really hard to make things. So I left not too long after that. So I left a little bit before the Snow that launched.
Shortly after Russ left, the last original co-founder, Lane Merrifield, also left the company, Operation Blackout being his final party. Within a month of him leaving, every room was redesigned, as well as every penguin in general, controversially leaving the game with two clashing art styles, as not everything was changed. However, we were only a few months away from the release of the final installment of Card-Jitsu, the Snowstorm. of 2013. On May 9th, 2013, a small snowstorm gathered above the dojo, gradually growing in size until May 23rd, which saw a new Card-Jitsu party, which reused most assets from the 2011 version, though with the added addition of snow camps to 1/3 of the island. And Card-Jitsu Snow launched. And that's it. There was no scavenger hunt, there was no celebration of snow. All of the traditions that we would have come to expect from Fire and Water were nowhere to be seen. Some snow was piled up by the dojo's doors for the first couple weeks, but then it disappeared, and that was all. The new creative teams had taken a completely different direction with Card-Jitsu Snow, and these changes were just the tip of the iceberg. Card-Jitsu Snow.
One single snowflake is quiet, but many of them a powerful force. Ninjas, all your training has come to this moment. Together, we must master the power of snow.
Battle in Card-Jitsu Snow, the newest ninja game. And members can get more power cards with special moves to defeat their enemies. Some features require paid membership. Ask your parents' permission to play.
Starting on May 23rd, the ninja hideout was removed entirely, and the third entrance to the Snow Dojo never came to fruition. Rather, all 3 dojos were now accessible through the dojo itself, and the bridges to all 3 were visible from the courtyard. The amulet was no longer required to enter the other dojos, which sort of rendered it useless. However, all versions of Card-Jitsu were finally free for anyone to play, permanently. In 2013, no new Card-Jitsu cards were produced, in the game or the real world. It turns out that 2010's Water expansion was the final surge of new cards into the game. However, by that point, there were 505 individual cards, 103 of which were power cards, so the game was fine. Card-Jitsu Snow did not have its own booster deck, and now new players would simply receive their starter deck, fire booster deck, and water booster deck by entering the dojo courtyard for the first time, rather than speaking to sensei at each individual dojo. And since the real-life cards had been slowly phased out of retail, they became available to purchase in-game instead, although only by paid members, because it can't be completely fair, can it? That being said, this was a way better application of the membership system. Anyone could now play the main games, and only members could get the special extra advantages by purchasing more cards. Far more ideal than locking the games themselves behind a paywall. Crossing the bridge would take you to a radically different Snow Dojo, a mountaintop arena with another bridge that led into the distance, accompanied by a mysterious, mystical underscore and blowing mountain wind. Although the original concept art of the Snow Dojo had closer resembled the other two, it was ultimately not used. There were no player mats on the ground this time. Crossing the rickety bridge was the only way to play Card-Jitsu Snow. For the first time, players fought alongside each other in order to combat a greater threat. There was a story, there was lore, and games usually took 10 minutes or more instead of the usual 2 to 3. Rather than casual training and sparring, Card-Jitsu Snow was a full-fledged RPG with cutscenes, and it was treated as life or death, with the fate of the island at stake. The music reflected this. Upon starting the game, players would choose which ninja they wanted to be between fire, water, and snow. They were then matched up with 2 players who chose the other 2 ninja types and were loaded onto a tiled grid on a mountaintop. Starting on the left, evil snowmen loaded onto the right, named Sly, Scrap, and Tank. From there, everyone took turns moving towards each other and attacking. First all the ninjas moved, then all the snowmen. Fire ninjas were able to move 2 spaces, had an attack range of 2 spaces, and dealt 8 points of damage. Water ninjas were able to move 2 spaces, had a very short attack range of 1 space, but dealt a full 10 points of damage. Snow ninjas were the best by far, able to move 3 spaces with an attack range of 3, 6 points of damage dealt by attacks, and the ability to heal the other ninjas within a range of 3 spaces as well. The game basically hinged on the Snow Ninja, who had to keep their team's health up, otherwise they'd be beaten into the ground and another player would have to spend multiple turns pumping them out, completely helpless. If all 3 ninjas were beaten into the ground, the round was over and your team would lose.
One snowflake means nothing, but a whole bunch of them is an avalanche. So that to me that's snow ninjas. So when they did the snow game, they kept that sort of core, which is working together.
Cards had almost nothing to do with the gameplay here. Each ninja would occasionally receive a power card of their element, and playing it on a snowman while in range would deal extra damage. If multiple players played a power card at the same time, a combo would occur. Each type of ninja's combo card had a special function attached to it, and whichever 2 ninjas did the combo would get those special functions to occur to all players within the 3x3 grid that the combo applies to. If all 3 ninjas did a combo, all 3 functions would happen. Each single game of Card-Jitsu Snow consisted of 3 rounds, with a bonus 4th round unlocked by beating a specific requirement, such as beating the enemies within a time limit. Your health would not repair between rounds. Winning levels would not only unlock the 4-piece Snow Ninja suit, which had special moves in-game like the other 2, you could also get a variety of other outfits, snow shurikens, fire nunchucks, and a water hammer. You could also unlock short 20-second snippets of a 4-minute fully animated animation called the Card-Jitsu Saga. In the years since 2010, Club Penguin had dipped its toes into actual voice acting via various shorts released online.
It's Sensei!
Your skills are impressive, but to become a true ninja master, you must learn to work as a team.
The guy who used to voice Herbert P. Bear? He's a big deal now. He was casted as additional voices in one episode of Marvel's What If. My guy's a celebrity, look at that. The Card-Jitsu Saga showed us Sensei's origins, and told the story of his childhood friend Tusk's fall from grace, who, after being humiliated by Sensei, became dedicated to master the element of snow and use it for evil.
Long, long ago, when I was just a young boy, I had a friend named Tusk. We did everything together. Like a pair of chopsticks, we were always by each other's side. It was a bond of brotherhood, frozen in time. Together, Tusk and I began our training in the art of Card-Jitsu. We learned to control the unyielding flame, embrace the crashing wave, and bow to the majestic snow flurry. But Tusk lacked discipline, and as our training intensified, our friendship changed. On a calm, clear day, Tusk and I agreed to practice snow together in a sparring match. Just as I was taking position, Tusk landed his first strike. Regaining my focus, I countered with a cold blast. What I saw next sent a shiver down my spine. Possessing magnificent strength, my friend raised a huge mass of snow over his head and released it towards me. I drew on all of my strength to stop its driving force. Blasted backwards, Tusk smashed into the mountainside. The earth quivered, the ground cracked, snow thundered down the mountain peak. Everything was buried. After weeks of searching for my friend, I discovered his broken tusk. What had I done? I vowed to master the elements and teach others to respect their power. I battled the snow, struggling to carve up through
icy layers. For years, I lived alone in the cold caves of the mountainside, constructing my lair. I returned to ninja training to learn the secrets of snow and harness its power. I devoted my focus to one goal. I would master snow. I would take revenge.
This led to the final battle of Card-Jitsu Snow, an extremely long battle against an extremely overpowered Tusk the Walrus, in which a CPU sensei assists you as well, attacking every round and being able to combo with you, accompanied by one final high-stakes variation of the Card-Jitsu Snow theme. During this extremely long game, you were treated to one final cutscene, the final piece of the Card-Jitsu saga.
You have won this time. Your sensei has clearly trained you well, but I have more power than all of you penguins. I will get revenge.
I think it was an interesting take, but it was really hard to coordinate what you were supposed to be doing with your other team members. And I think that was sort of its difficulty.
So really, in terms of the game design there, that was a big one from Charlene. She did a bunch of work on that concept, and she was just like, hey, I don't want to do another game that's exactly like the other ones. I want to kind of throw the cards away a little bit and just have more of a story. So to me, Card-Jitsu Snow is almost like a bit of a reset.
When we were designing games for 11, 12-year-olds, like older sort of games, whereas the target market was a lot younger. And so I think both Water may have been a bit complicated, just from a hand-eye coordination. I would certainly do things differently if I had to now. And I think Snow was a bit that way as well. So I'm not, again, I don't know what they went through to actually get that game out onto market, because the game you want to make and the game that's released are often very, very different because of constraints that nobody sees.
As a kid, I thought Card-Jitsu Snow sucked because no one I ever played with was competent. Snow ninjas would never just heal you, and the other players would constantly go AFK and constantly make a bad move after bad move. In the other Card-Jitsu games, if the other players went AFK, well, there'd be a lot of waiting, but you'd ultimately win. Here, though, they would bring your game down with theirs. I actually never went all the way as a Snow Ninja, because not only could my team never win, but I could never find anyone to play with. The vast majority of my time in the Card-Jitsu Snow arena was waiting for other players to connect. I'd wait, and wait, and wait, and then get disconnected after 10 minutes for being idle for too long. Every time! And what I learned while researching this video is that in Card-Jitsu Snow, you were actually linked with players from other servers. To make sure that players in less crowded servers weren't left waiting, they filled Card-Jitsu Snow games with players from every server. So that apparently means that no one on any server in Club Penguin was playing Card-Jitsu Snow when I was online. And whenever I was lucky enough to get loaded into a round, the Snow Ninja wouldn't heal at all, and we'd all immediately die. That's been repressed inside me for almost 9 years. A couple years later, a revive card was added for members. Essentially a full regeneration of your health bar that could be used at any point. It can also take you out of the ground if you're in it. But by then, I had already stopped playing. I had no clue this existed until putting this video together.
It was a game about teamwork, but you didn't know what you were supposed to do. And there was no, you didn't either know or you didn't care sort of thing. And that's the difficulty when you depend on your other players to make that experience good. You have to go in with a team that understands their part and wants to do this. Otherwise, it's chaos. Which, to be fair, I was going to say probably would have had the same thing. I remember from some of our testing for the snowball thing, is some kids got it and now, they would steer the snowball this way. And other kids were just, you would just literally see them running around on the snowball. And you're like, no, you're making everybody hit the tree. And they would just delight in it. You're like, oh yeah, okay. It's tough to make games for lots of people at once.
After defeating Tusk, his cape became a wearable item, and that was that. There were no updates to the ninja experience ever again after May 2013. Not even another Card-Jitsu party. The most relevant ninjas ever were to the duration of Club Penguin was the 2013 Star Wars party when Sensei played Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, rumors and speculation constantly ran rampant about a fifth aspect of the ninja experience.
There's a cave on the mountain over here. Some people say that it's actually the dojo to Snow, but I have things that prove otherwise. So let's take a look at the map over here. Now for this, we're going to have to get a little technical and break out a compass. If the cave is not facing the same way and they're not the same caves, then what is the cave there for? It's something that we can only find out over time.
Okay, can you see how the cloud has gone from white to grey? This could be a sign of shadow. Who knows? As you can see from the amulet, there is a snow, fire and water gem. But in the middle, there is a black gem. Could it be a shadow gem?
That kid's video from 2013 is 1080p. Like, mad props to this kid. Players began wondering about a potential Card-Jitsu Shadow, and for a time, the Club Penguin team began development on the game. You see, as soon as the amulet was introduced in 2009, players began speculating that a fourth Card-Jitsu spin-off might exist. And in 2010's Water expansion, the team even made a Shadow Ninja power card to help fuel the fire. Every month I'd see people online speculate that Card-Jitsu Shadow was coming. In fact, many people were 100% convinced that Operation Blackout would introduce Card-Jitsu Shadow, despite the fact that Snow hadn't come out yet. Hidden in the game's files, players even discovered a fully designed 4-piece Shadow Ninja costume, meaning that an artist was paid to design this, and developers put it in the game's code. With Chris Glidden on the call, I decided to finally get those answers.
Oh, what's the shadow element? Is there a shadow element? So at the time, we just basically, all we had was a Shadow Ninja costume. It was just almost like a match of the water, fire, and snow outfits. We had the Shadow Ninja costume, which I'm sure you've seen because everybody's seen it by this point. And that was going to be mobile exclusive. So you would play the Card-Jitsu Classic on mobile, and you get to the end and you get the Shadow Ninja suit. So really, it's kind of, I think, almost for the best that didn't launch, because if you think about it, it's like a lot of people would have had the sort of the Herbert's Revenge reaction to be like, oh, I've already played this though, so I wanted new content. I was kind of hoping for a new game or a new experience. We did also separately, a lot of the team, we had concepts for what is Card-Jitsu Shadow, because we're like, it's way too cool to just throw it away on like, oh, it's just a mode or it's just an outfit. We're like, this is way too cool. Like, why are we wasting this? Like, why don't we make something cool out of this? It's like, it's the fourth gem. It's the middle of the amulet. Like, why would you not do something with this? So there are a lot of ideas thrown around. But there's two that really stand out to me as like the ones I remember, which is there's two concepts. One is taking the idea, because think about Card-Jitsu Snow was a bit of a reboot, right? So there was like, you take the original Card-Jitsu and he kind of rethought and reimagined the whole story, because now there's a new villain, there's all this new stuff that's happened. So in a way, it kind of almost resets the story and starts in a new phase. So we would have had to continue the Tusk story. It would have kind of had to lean into that. So one of the concepts that we had was a little bit like a Slay the Spire style game. I don't know if you're familiar with that game, but it's basically a head-to-head battler where you have, this is my character on the left and this is who I'm battling on the right, just like Card-Jitsu. The difference is it's much more involved. It's in the board game world, they call it a deck builder. So it's a deck building game. You basically have a stack of cards that's yours. You shuffle that deck, and then you deal yourself 5 cards. And those are the actions you have as your available hand this turn. So you can do one of the actions in your hand only. So it's kind of like you have the agency of choice. You can choose what's in your hand, and that's it. So it gives you constraints, and you're trying to defeat the other player. So it's more hit points based. So you'd have like a little meter bar. It's like, okay, I did this many damage with this card. So it knocked their points back a bit. So that was one concept, was this kind of like deck builder battler. And then the other one was actually a totally different idea, which is actually more of a twin stick shooter style. So if you're familiar, it was actually what we were thinking was something a little bit like Pocky and Rocky. It's a shooting game, like a shmup, where you're basically moving your character and shooting forward, and then there's enemies coming to you. But the difference is you're a little character running around, right? So it takes place in sort of feudal Japan as this sort of like in almost like a Shinto world, and you're like throwing cards. You're like, and I was like, this is perfect. Like that one out of all of them to me is the most exciting, because it's like a 2-player co-op head-to-head shooter where you're throwing cards in all the different directions and there's obstacles flying at you. Like that would be just super fun. It's kind of the idea that you're getting powers and you're playing your power cards, and then that becomes a bonus. So yeah, I still think one day I'd love to make games like that, those two games, but those are the ones that I remember.
If you're an avid Club Penguin enjoyer, you might be wondering what the music you're listening to is. And that's where we go way back to what I said at the beginning. And original music developed by Chris Hendricks, Club Penguin's original composer. I reached out to Chris, the man who composed Card-Jitsu, Card-Jitsu Fire, and Card-Jitsu Water, and asked if he wanted to finish what he started by composing original music for Card-Jitsu Shadow, and he was more than interested. So here is the unofficial official theme for Club Penguin, Card-Jitsu Shadow.
Why did the team ultimately decide to not go in the direction of Card-Jitsu Shadow?
I don't think we really decided. I think we just had all these other things that we were doing. You know, people just wanted a lot of mission stuff, so it became a sort of which one does better. And because Operation Blackout combined the spy theme and questing with a party, parties were always the biggest drivers. They were the reason to come back. From a data perspective, like Card-Jitsu Snow wouldn't look as big on paper as, you know, Operation Blackout would have looked. So it probably was really down to just other priorities based on the data, actually. Like, I don't remember a conscious conversation that said, let's not work on Shadow. I think it was more like a side of desk. And I know that Russ has got a different one that they talked about internally as well. So that's why it's good to chat with different people to get different points of view.
The Card-Jitsu that the internet sort of talks about, Card-Jitsu Shadow, is different from what I experienced and what I think of it as. So to me, Card-Jitsu Shadow was always the first Card-Jitsu. So before Fire and Water and Snow, that Card-Jitsu by itself is Card-Jitsu Shadow. So when you earned your ninja suit, you could become a shadow. And those are all the references in the dojo or to this initial ninja suit, like all those sort of shadowy characters. But as with most things in life, and especially on Club Penguin, sometimes they get woven together differently. And then sometimes at Club Penguin, we would just go with that. If the audience says, I think this is this, and they put all these pieces together, we're like, yeah, that's exactly it. We did that. Yeah, we put those in there. Thank you. And then, then we go off and make it real. So we had plans for 4 games. So Card-Jitsu Water, Fire, Snow. Once you master all of those games, you become an elemental ninja. And you could wield all 3 elements at once. Was where I wanted to take it, sort of thing. Like in the courtyard where you had the 3 temples and we filled them in, when you mastered all 3 of those, the symbol in the middle of the floor, and we had artwork for this, I don't know where it is, but would lower and reveal staircase down to the elemental temple.
Oh, wow.
That's what was going to happen.
That was going to be the 4th game. Okay.
That was the 4th game. So the 4th game wasn't Shadow in my mind. The 4th game was Elemental.
Chris, you know what to do. Okay, can we just talk about how hard that went, man? Like, it was good at first. Then after a while, I was like, oh, Snow hasn't shown up. Maybe he's not gonna include that one because he didn't compose it. And then when Snow came in, it was the best thing I've ever heard. Very good work, Chris. You may live.
And we hadn't worked it all out. We were like, okay, well, we'll just get Snow out there. And then while Snow is doing, we'll figure out exactly what Elemental is. But yeah, that's about the time I left. Fire's explosive. Fire ninjas are explosive. It's just contained fury, basically. Water is all about sort of slow and powerful. It would be water ninjas. Snow ninjas are about the power of many, about working together. Just led to, in the 4th game, now you basically have different styles of jitsu. So you've got like snow jitsu, fire jitsu, water jitsu sort of thing. And then we're going to wrap it all together. So yeah, that's where we were going with it. I'm trying to remember if we ever got to code with any of them. I don't think so. I had one. So imagine a circular arena and you would come in with your team of ninjas, basically. So now imagine sort of 3 viewing areas equidistant apart around the outside. And what you did then was you would use your cards to launch basically balls of whatever element it was. So if you had a 2 of fire, you would launch this little ball of element out onto the arena, in the middle of the arena. If you had a power card, you would launch a great big ball. And it was now you had to sort of point it and almost like a golf swing, figure out how far you could throw it. And then it would land in the arena and capture your area for your team. So that was now your area. And if somebody else wanted to take that area out, they would have to fire a competing element. So I'd have to fire a big ball of water into your fire area. And now I would extinguish your fire and capture it for me. So it was going to be 3 or 4 teams at once, all firing these elements into an arena and trying to capture as much space as you could. That was one of the ideas I had.
All of the lore, all of the gameplay, and all of the secrets. From the volcano, to the waterfall, to the mountaintop. The story of Card-Jitsu isn't really about mastering the elements or Sensei's battle with Tusk. It's the story of developers navigating a rapidly changing industry, giving their all to deliver something satisfying to an audience of millions of kids. That was the Club Penguin Ninja experience. And that was the 5-year storyline that none of us even knew was happening.
It's been fun actually watching people like yourself, where you meet them as kids when they're young and playing your game, and then you get older and you age up, and so do they. And like, you know, the first few times that some of our super fans are like, yeah, I just finished my, you know, my entrance exams for college, you're like, boom, just blows your mind entirely.
While our connection to Club Penguin has been severed, the island's still out there somewhere. Our penguins are still waddling around and making new friends nearly a decade later. And while we'll never know what our penguins are up to, we know for sure that fire, water, and snow were only the beginning. I want to give a massive thank you to Chris Glidden and Russ for sitting down and doing this interview with me. There's actually a lot we talked about that didn't make it into this video, and I suggest you go and watch my individual interviews with them if you're interested. With Russ, I discussed the development of the PSA missions, and with Chris, I discussed his thoughts on the decline of Club Penguin and its follow-up, Club Penguin Island.
The growth was slowing, it was declining because of Flash, and people were moving onto mobile, right, and playing Minecraft.
Be sure to like and subscribe, or subscribe and like if you want it. The order doesn't matter, but you have to do both of them. I would very much appreciate if you donated some money to my Patreon here. It's the P right here. Bye!